Hi, I'm at an event organized by the Association of Registered Investment Advisors, and I'm in conversation with the chair and the vice chair, Roongta, as well as Vishal Dhawan. Thank you so much for taking the time. Now, it has been a couple of years since the segregation was done by the regulator, SEBI, between registered investment advisors as well as distributors of mutual funds. And I think that was lauded in general because it gave a little bit of clarity for the people that are seeking that advice. But there are a few pain points. But before we get to that, I would like to ask, maybe I'll start with you, Vishal, to talk about whether or not the industry or the fraternity has benefited from that segregation.
So I think there's definitely been some benefits that have come through over a period of time. I think one is there is some level of investor awareness now that depending on what they're looking for, they can actually go there and pick a different kind of intermediary. Once upon a time, you had no choice. You essentially had to figure out yourself whether this person is actually going to be fiduciary in terms of how they work with you, or are they going to just, give you an investment product. That's number one. Number two is there's been clearly an upward trajectory in terms of the quality of people who are now giving investment advice. Because a lot of what has come in has also meant that standards have gone up. And while many of us may sort of wonder if it's gone too high, I think there is definitely an elevation of the industry itself that has happened.
Okay.
And last but not the least, I think you're now starting to see investors overseas say that, just like we have segregated advisors available overseas, now I can also see that same happen in India. And that's great because it means that the entire industry is moving towards client centricity, which is so important in this sort of a business.
Over 200, if I'm not mistaken, investment advisors here at the event today. And I was speaking to quite a few of them, and there are a few pain points that have come up. One is a very significant barrier for entry into this space. And there are a couple of others, including the restriction on the fee. Are these very significant issues that need to be corrected at this point?
So, for any profession, fresh blood is extremely important. And I think because of the issues with the trading call providers, the entry restrictions and even continuing, the requirements to continue in the profession, they have been tightened significantly, and correctly so. We should have good and tight regulations, but I think it has been overdone a bit. The issue is that if you have such tight regulations, and that's manifested in many ways, whether you look at the pass percentage in the certifying exams, okay, we don't have the exact data, but anecdotally that's very low. So that's required to be done not just when you enter. It's not just one time. Every 3 years you are supposed to do it, and it's a tough exam whose standards will keep varying, and you have to do the entire exam again. It's not a part exam. So I think these are big issues, or whether there is a 5-year experience requirement. Now that means that somebody, and a lot of us RIAs today, and a lot of the leading light RIAs came from, let's say, the information technology industry. 2 of the ARIA board members used to be in information technology. Under the new rules, they would not have been eligible to become an RIA. So I think these over tight regulations need to be looked at. There needs to be tight regulations. This ultimately, we perform a fiduciary, responsibility to our clients. We keep their clients' interest in above our own, and therefore there needs to be certain standards. But we need to be careful that we don't strangulate the profession.
You were referring to the requirement for certification. I believe this is the NISM exam, and you're saying that the entire exam needs to be done once every 3 years. So effectively, I think if I'm not mistaken, regulations came start of 2020, which means that a lot of the people in this room will have to give that exam at the end of this year.
Including us.
Have you begun studying?
I will begin study. I haven't begun studying, but jokes apart, I think this is a serious impediment. I like the example I've always given, that if a person who's choosing between careers, right, and let's say he's choosing between medical and paramedical. Okay, and medical requires that every 3 years you have to give the exam again. Even though if he is a practicing doctor, there is no reason why he should not pass. But the lack of continuity or the lack of assurance on continuity, I think, is a huge dampener for fresh blood coming into the into the industry. I think this needs to be relooked at. There are multiple other issues, right?
Yeah.
Whether the compulsory corporatization beyond 150, and the whole-time member today, Mr. Anand Narayan, spoke about some of the constraints that the regulator has. So there are obviously things to be said for both sides. As of now, I think some amount of we need to consider the fact that it has probably become too tight.
So the other aspect, and I heard this a lot, Vishal, speaking to people again, is the cap on the fee that is charged. Now, there are two ways in which an investment advisor like yourself can earn money. One is through a flat rate. So as a prospective client, I come to you and I say, hey, can you help me with my financial planning? And you say, I will charge you X amount of money. You give me advice, I take that money, or rather I take that advice and I execute that plan. That is on me. Alternatively, I come to you and you can give me ongoing advice and you charge me a percentage of my AUM. These are the two ways in which there is a restriction on how much you can charge as a flat rate. Why is that a problem?
So actually the problem comes from a slightly different place in our view. If you go back to pre-2020 regulations, a lot of financial planners actually charged a fixed fee for the initial work that they did with clients on financial planning. And then they moved to an assets under management model for ongoing advisory if the client chose to go down that path. Now, what the model does today, or the regulation says today, is you got to choose one. And that gets very complicated because the initial part of the work that you do is very strategic consulting kind of work, where typically you put in a number of hours, and those number of hours in turn at some rate give you a fee in return, which is like a fixed fee. And then you have the other side, which is if a client chooses and not do it yourself, but he just wants ongoing advice, hand-holding, lots of decisions to be made, he picks the AUM model. I think the first restriction comes saying, why can't you do both if that's what the client believes is best for him, with proper disclosures and all of that. Number two is that we need to remember that there is inflation impacts that are going to happen on all businesses. And the moment you put a fixed cap, essentially what you're saying is that until that cap changes, which so far for the last 3 years, for example, it hasn't, but let's assume that it doesn't change for another few years, all of a sudden the 125,000 is not what it used to be 3 years ago, and therefore there's a need for inflation adjustment to happen. The other thing is also there's a lot of innovation happening on pricing models globally, and coming from investors themselves. Some of them are saying, why don't we just work on an Ali fee? I'm going to pay you for your Ali advice.
Like a lawyer.
Like a lawyer, that's right. Or someone else comes and says, I'm happy to work with a profit share model.
Okay.
So I do think that there are innovations in the industry also that get restricted by forcing people to choose between one and the other. I think it needs to be more open. Of course, there need to be control mechanisms put into place, etc. But I suspect that just straitjacketing it into two options and saying you got to choose between the two doesn't work well.
And the last point that I want to raise on this pricing issue, Harsh, is that and the insight again that I've gotten here is that by mandating a cap, you're forcing people, because they need to have a certain earning, to have a percentage approach or percentage of AUM approach. And then you get likened to a wealth manager, which is not your primary function. Again, is that a major issue?
Of course, as Vishal also mentioned, these I would say these are artificial restrictions, and these were born. Let's just find out the history. Why did the caps come? Okay, caps are not usual. Regulators rarely like to put caps. Okay, the reason the caps have come were again because of some of the malpractices that the trading call advisors had done. Okay, and effectively the clients were thinking they are doing investments, and actually those were adjusted against fees. So one of the ways in which it was sort of taken care of, you cannot charge more than this fee. Now, while it works to restrict them, it also, as Vishal said, it puts us in a zone where we may not want to be. Some of us are happy with that. Some of us may not want to do that. So there are, as he said, there are many models. There are people who do only planning. They do not do anything else, right? Then they have an issue that they do planning, and after that the person is not their client, so they will hit the 150 limit very, very quickly. But they are saying that I don't have to handle that client any longer, do not have that 150 limit. There's no clarity on that. Mixture is an issue. So it is really an issue because it forces us into a straitjacket. And as you said, one of the issues with that also is that you get compared to a portfolio manager or a AIF, which is definitely not our ambit.
All right, so there you have it. Those are the issues that have cropped up and that are certainly going to be spoken about. But tell us what you think about your approach to investments, whether you take advice and whether you'd be comfortable with one of the suggestions, which is to have an hourly rate like you would have with a lawyer. Do stay tuned. This is BQ Prime.